for women especially, we've been trained to give. So it's like, how can we open ourselves up? How can we create bodily safety to receive as well? So when you become aware of these needs of yours, and then okay, this person can fill that need, it also kind of pushes you open to receive that from that person.
Hello and welcome. Kate Champion here, and I'm excited to share this powerful conversation with you today. This week, I am chatting with life and relationship expert Tannaz Hosseinpour. Today, we are taking a deep dive into communication, emotional regulation, ego, and we explore the concept of intimacy tanks. Tannaz starts out by sharing a little bit about her personal story, and then we jump in. Tannaz helps us understand why it is so important to create an us, the power of learning to pause rather than blowing things up, and how we can begin to let go of ego as a way to repair. Then Tannaz tells us about her 6 intimacy tanks, which is a very helpful framework that helps us navigate ourselves and our relationships more effectively. This episode is packed full of tips, strategies, and actionable sage advice. Tannaz is so generous with her time, wisdom, and expertise. And as a human in a long-term relationship, I particularly appreciated the reminder that these are skills we can all begin to learn and use. Now for a fun announcement. For the next few weeks, we are celebrating Community Awareness Month, and I need your help to spread the word. Here's how you can help. Number 1, sign up for the newsletter. Go to katechampionauthor.com, sign up, and that will get you updates, new episodes, and invites right into your inbox. Number 2, please leave a review for the podcast. And when you've done that, snap me a screenshot, send it to me on Facebook or Instagram, and I will send you a free digital copy of my best-selling book, You Are Limitless. And number 3, please share this podcast with a friend. It is such a gift. And if they reach out to me with a screenshot, I will send them a copy of the book too. It is a win-win. So how fun is that? Thank you. You know, your support means the world to me, and I'm confident that together we can get the word out and help even more people live longer, stronger, more intentional lives. That is exactly what the show and my mission is all about. So again, thank you. And please know, whether you are listening for the first time or a regular, I appreciate you, I support you, and I do thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Okay, my friends, here's Tannaz. Good morning. I am so excited to welcome Tannaz. I got that right? Okay, I'm terrible with names. To the show this morning. Tannaz reached out to me and kind of wondered if she'd be a good guest for the show. And I looked at some of her work and content, and I thought, yeah, she would be amazing. She's one busy woman. She has a ton going on, podcasts, communities. She's at school. She's got a children's book. So she is a busy woman. So Tannaz, hello, how are you?
Hi, Kate. I'm good. And yourself?
Good, thank you. It's really nice to connect today.
It really is. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, of course. So today we're going to kind of dive into things like relationships, conflict management, conflict resolution. She's going to help us with that. She has an amazing podcast called Minutes on Growth. And in fact, I tuned into an episode or two, and I love the one about fair fighting. In fact, I shared it with a couple of friends. It was super short, but there were like 6 points on there. It was like, yes, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about you and your journey and how you got to do what you're doing today.
Well, I'm definitely not doing what I anticipated to do. So the plan was to go to law school and be a practicing attorney, and that's what I did. I went, got my master's in law, and shortly after, I realized this isn't really aligned with what I wanted to do. I was on the reactive side of relationships, like family mediation. So it's all about like separation and divorce and helping kind of people mediate fights, but for me, it was like, how did we get to this point? When you get married, you're so in love. What happens along the way that gets us here? And so, through a series of divine coincidences, which I don't believe in, I really think everything is happening for us. I went down the path of coaching, specialized in relationships. This was around 8 years ago. And then recently, 3 years ago, went back for my third master's degree in counseling psychotherapy to kind of have more tools to help my clients build healthier relationships with themselves and, of course, with their significant other. So that's how I ended up here. But the plan was to be on the other side of the line.
That is really interesting because when they think about, I have a similar background with the psychology and the counseling, etc. I'm a therapist, right? So that for me, that feels like a very different brain, right, than the legal kind of law brain. So I kind of, I'm curious. So tell me about like one or two of those divine kind of coincidences that kind of really shifted your path and made you pivot. Would you mind sharing maybe one of those or two of those?
Yeah, of course. So I remember, like, even with my podcast, when I say divine coincidence, I mean that, like, the universe speaks to us through other people. And so I remember I was in Dubai, living in Dubai at that time, and a friend reached out to me and said, "Oh my God, you should do a podcast." Because at that time I would like tweet on Twitter, and he's like, "You should do a political podcast," because my undergrad was in politics and religion. And I was like, what is a podcast? This is like 2017. He's like, oh, it's like this concept, like you can talk, you can share. And I've always had this teacher archetype. I was like, oh, I'd love to share. But I sat with it and I was like, no, it doesn't feel aligned to do a political podcast, but I would love to do one on spirituality. And back then I was like 4 or 5 years into my spiritual, like actually deep studying. So I was like, okay, that sounds good. Maybe I'll share that. And then it was like, I would love to share about conscious entrepreneurship and topics that were really of interest to me. And that's how the podcast started. So it was really a suggestion by someone else and just me kind of acting on it. And at the same time, I was running a book club because I just love to read. And I think it's one of the easiest ways to hold ourselves accountable with like our passions and our habits. And this girl that had joined the book club, she was like, have you ever considered being a coach? I'm like, what is that? And she was let's go on Instagram. So I remember I went on Instagram and I typed in coach. I just needed to see like what it was because in my mind it was like fitness trainer. I was like, what is this like realm that I'm unaware of? And she was like, she also had a degree in law. She's like, let's get our certification and like we could do something like a center to here together on mindfulness and all of that. And we started together, but she didn't follow through. I did. And it was during that time that I had finished my master's in law. And because I had this like big question mark, I think that big question mark kind of created space for other suggestions to come in. I was sitting in the
Mhm.
discomfort of this isn't feeling aligned. I need to do something that makes me happy. And I come from a Middle Eastern background where my parents are like, you're either a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. So at that point, I was like, okay, I have the degree. So it's kind of like they're happy, they're pleased. What am I going to do with it? So again, it was through the mouth of someone else. And so I started that 8 years ago. And then a couple of years ago, that's funny, I was sitting, this idea just came to me. You should go back to school this time to be a therapist. And I was invited to speak and actually be like the MC of this human rights event here by the Center of Human Rights. And I was sitting at my table. There was this girl, and she was telling me about, yeah, I'm just going to school again. I'm being a therapist. My background is in coaching. I was like, oh my God, I've been thinking about that. Can you tell me about your school? She did, and I'm at that school now. So it really was like sometimes you set an intention and the answer comes, and sometimes you just sit in the discomfort of not knowing and the answer comes.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And my whole body is kind of resonating because I'm just such a believer in these, I don't know, kind of divine interventions or divine invitations or these kind of the I call it kind of when connect the dots kind of connect and suddenly it's bing 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 bing, but you kind of feel, or you kind of feel into it, right? What feels right or what feels wrong? Because there were several examples in that in your background where I could have gone this way and I could have gone that way, but that didn't feel aligned. But this, oh my gosh, you can really feel it. This is the direction, and the faith, right, and the trust and the courage it takes to kind of open some of those doors. That's beautiful. I love that.
Thank
Love
you.
that. Thank you so much for sharing. So cool. So cool. All right, so let's dive in, right? We're going to talk about relationships. We're going to talk about conflict. We're going to talk about fair and unfair fighting. And then we're going to talk about your 6 intimacy types. So let's talk about relationships. I mean, today, relationships, such a massive continuum, right? So how do you look at and define kind of relationships just in general?
So it's interesting because I grew up in an environment where healthy relationships weren't modeled to me. So I really didn't know what they looked like. My idea of a normal relationship was a little bit different. Also coming from a patriarchal society and just different, culture plays such a big role in our perception of life. And so for me, it was how can we cultivate a relationship that feels um, fun? That was my initial question of how can it feel fun? And how can it feel less heavy? Like, so there's not these like roller coaster emotions. How can it be a little bit more steady? And so I started to do the research and I've been in therapy since 18 and I was like doing all the inner work and I was so aware of why I was doing what I was doing. But still, I didn't see a big shift in the quality of my relationships. And it wasn't until I started actually studying like communication styles and relational skills and it clicked for me. It was like, okay, it's 50% inner work, but it's also 50% relational skills that we're not taught. We're not taught in school. Most of us don't experience it and see it firsthand in our family of origin. So that was a big pivotal point for me. And this is what I share with everyone of do the inner work. It's great. It's great to be aware of the baggage that you bring in, the blessings that you bring in, but that doesn't take over learning certain skills that again we weren't taught. So for me, a relationship is 50% doing the inner work and 50% learning the relational skills to cultivate a healthy dynamic. Doesn't mean it's a challenge-free dynamic or it's a perfect dynamic because it doesn't exist. We're two perfect humans coming together with this awareness for accountability, um, for consistently showing up, for repairing. But it does mean that I'm committed to learning how to love you better, and you're committed to learning how to love me better. And I'm aware of how I want to be loved so I can give you that insight as well.
I just want to take a breath there because I feel like that is so powerful, right? Learning to love the other, but learning to love yourself as well. And be committed to your own personal growth within that relationship because I'm a therapist. I work with couples. That people are often so far from that. I mean, there's all the we might be getting off track here, but that's okay. There might, I just see a lot of the shaming and blaming, the finger pointing, and you did this and you did that, and rah, rah, rah. But and the result of that is I do believe that people haven't done a lot of their inner work, right? They haven't healed their own trauma. They haven't kind of looked in the cupboards and why am I responding like that? Why am I reacting like that? Why am I shaming this person? Why am I blaming this person? So, oh my gosh, thank you. So give me an example, maybe, of somebody that you've worked with that, you've used this kind of 50% internal work and 50% skill building. Give me maybe a little bit of an example.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one that comes to mind is, and I think this is important to share as an example because it's not the ending that we envision. But I started working with a couple and they were engaged a couple of years in at that point. And we started to do the inner work. And then we started to bring in the relational skills of, okay, how do we want to communicate with each other? How do we want to feel in the relationship? How does the other person want to feel? And after doing the inner work and learning these skills, it was a year or two in, maybe even more, like 2 years in, they came and they said, listen, we have the tools. We have why we are the way we are. Can you help us consciously uncouple? And yeah, and they went through such a beautiful process of consciously separating and have remained the closest of friends that they rely on each other. They can really lean into that friendship. But that was so powerful because it also shows that, you know, you when you know yourselves, sometimes we're in a relationship because we don't know ourselves. But when we learn those relational skills, great, you can make it work. But if the if it's not aligned from the inside, that's okay
Yeah.
too. And I
Yeah.
think that's sometimes when people are hesitant to do the inner work, like, what if I do the inner work and I'm actually in a situation that's not good for me, that's not meant for me?
Yeah, that doesn't align, that this
Mhm.
isn't really meeting my needs, right? When we, I think there's so many unconscious patterns and processes that kind of bring people together in that first stage of kind of attraction. And I went in my mind, there's kind of phases of this connection, in that kind of honeymoon phase, right? There's so much going in the body and there's so much stuff unconsciously. But then we do get to a phase, right, where we start to say, is this right for me? Is this wrong for me? How is this going? But I think being able to get to that point and then I love that word, kind of uncouple with love, right? Because we fell in love, right? So why can't we uncouple with that and try and keep at least some of that care intact? Yes, it maybe you're not in love anymore, but you still probably care about that person, even though you're separating.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because,
Yeah. World needs more of
um,
that.
we don't need to, it doesn't need to get messy. Some To be fair, when kids are involved, it's a different dynamic. But when it's just the two of them, there is another way out. And I don't think we see that often. When we think of divorce, we think of separation. It's always like, oh, it's never going to be positive, and there's just a societal narrative around it. So I think it's important to talk about these experiences. And also, to give another example of, I had a couple that they were dating for 10 years, but it was a very roller coaster type of relationship. And we started working together, and just, she always says, she's like, I never knew how to speak to my now husband in a way that didn't make him feel like it was critical. And it was just some small shifts here and there of, how can I express my needs in a way that he can hear it and is receptive to it? And 180 over, like, I think we were working together for 3 months, but
Yeah.
shortly after they got married, and they have three beautiful kids right now. But sometimes it's also like just learning how to speak your mind in a way that is different from how you heard it growing up. And it's just those small shifts can make such a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah. And again, that includes part of that includes having to look, right? Look what comes when you do this, right? When I see that, I had a woman the other day, she was so triggered by her husband nonverbal, kind of a little bit of an eye roll and a little bit of a when she kind of requested a need. So she came into session, so frustrated, and we were able to say, okay, so what is that? Yeah, I know that's not great from him, but what is that about for you? And we will be kind of be able to kind of dig in, and it was all about kind of being rejected and not being heard as a kid. And once she was able to kind of conceptualize that, like open the cupboards and take this out, take a look, right? Then she was able to go back and have a whole different energy in that kind of communication with him. And more about now he's doing this and he's doing that. She's able to say, oh, sometimes I feel, right? And then they can connect and have a conversation. So beautiful, totally, totally getting it. All right, so we talked about relationships and we're now kind of moving into this kind of conflict resolution, fair and unfair fighting. So I don't know, probably a whole nother episode on that, but tell me a little bit about what does fair fighting look like and what is unfair? What should we do and what should we definitely not do?
Mhm. I think you already touched on one that was really powerful of uh, being aware of your triggers and kind of communicating that to your partner. And then your partner doesn't use that against you, right? So, hey, listen, this is what I've noticed that, when someone sighs, I perceive it as X. Can you please be mindful of that, right? So the relationship is safe enough for us to be vulnerable. And I think relational safety um, is the pillar, the foundation of a healthy relationship. Can I be myself? Can I say what I'm thinking and you're not going to use that against me to hurt me in the future? So part of fighting fair is how can we speak our mind in a way that we both leave feeling heard and respected. At least
Mm,
respected, even if not heard, because ruptures can exist, we can come back and repair, but the boundary of respect remains. So step one, the problem remains the problem. The problem doesn't become the other person. The problem is the dishes are really triggering when I come home and I see a mess in the kitchen. But when I say you're so messy, now the problem is no longer the dishes. You are the problem. And if you're going to attack my character, guess what? The other person's going to say, I'm messy. Wait a second. They're going to critique you back, which is what the Gottman Institute talks about as the four horsemen, which is what you want to avoid in a relationship: criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. So, how can we keep the problem, not attack the character? How can we learn how to emotionally regulate during a fight? I think that is so,
mm,
so, so important. We, when the moment your heart rate goes up, the moment you start to sweat, the moment um, some people are like, I blank out, like I just can't see in front of me anymore. So powerful in that moment to pause. Viktor Frankl is a beautiful quote that I don't want to butcher, but in essence, he's saying that your power lies within the trigger and the pause. If and the response. So that pause between the moment you get triggered, that you to the moment you respond, if you can take a break and say time out, and you can use a word that signals time out in your relationship and you communicate that with your partner of when I say potatoes, that's it. It's like the argument stops and you pause and you go for a walk and you splash cold water to your face, you rub ice cubes on the back of your neck, you scream in a pillow, you cry, you shake it off, the different tools that you have in your toolbox. Then, when you're feeling regulated, you come back. Because again, science is showing us that when we're in that dysregulated state, we can't actually hear what the other person is saying. We're hearing to respond, we're not hearing to understand. That part of our brain that processes it shuts down. So, I can't, if I were to just like write a book on conflict resolution, I think the title would just be Pause, because so much healing takes place in that pause. So I would
mm,
say pause as often as you need to. There are times in my own relationship we're having a conversation and it's such a triggering, heated conversation that we will pause 20 times. The conversation will last for days, but I'd rather pause, take a time out than cross a boundary that I can't come back from. And this is an invisible line, but it's like once you shatter a glass, you can put it back together. Um, but the remnants of it is going to be there. And so we want to minimize the pain that we're causing the other person and causing ourselves, because ultimately you and me come together and we create us. And this us is like our product. It's our baby. It's our most honored mm, creation. So we want to nurture it, we want to respect it, we want to honor it. And so I would say pause,
mm,
don't attack the character, focus
mhm,
on the problem, and learn how to express your needs of when X happens, I feel Y, I need Z. When you don't call me to let me know you're running late, I feel abandoned. I feel overlooked. I feel insignificant. Can you please text me when you're on your way? When you're running late, whatever it is, you start with simple phrases to kind of get into the habit of it. And, I always say fighting fair means we're fighting, it's me and you versus the problem. We're a team.
mm.
It's not
Mm,
me versus you. We're not in a battlefield. And oftentimes when we're fighting, it's like we're in court. Let me tell you why I'm right. Do you remember at 4:59 you sent me that text message like receipts? Stop lawyering up. You're not in court. You're in the most cherished space of your life.
mm,
Get on the other side of the stand. The two of you stand on one side. Let the problem be on the other side and figure out how to tackle it together with a
yeah.
little bit more grace and a little bit more compassion.
Kindness, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah. So again, I want to take a, I'm going to take a pause there, right? And I really want to underline something, right? If you can imagine when you said really hit for me, it's us, right? It's this it's this relationships, cherished relationship that these two people have decided to build. It's us against the problem, right? So that for me just feels like the two people are so aligned, right? And it's the problem they had to kind of figure out instead of this, now there's this problem and we're battling, right? It's you against me, and like you said, we're lowering up, and how could you, and you should have done this, and 5 years ago, blah 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 blah, right? I can't really throwing the kitchen sink in. So again, I want to underline that it's, remember, right, listeners, when you're in that conflict, it's stay connected, right? And it's
Mhm.
the two of you against the problem. Tanaz, I love that. Thank you so much
Yeah, of
for
course.
sharing. So powerful, so powerful. Um, so you have the six tanks of intimacy, six tanks of is that the way you say it? Six intimacy
Yeah.
tanks. Which what's
Yes.
the correct? Correct me. Which is the
Six
what's the
intimacy tanks.
got it. I am super curious about that. So let's share, give listeners some ideas, and let's kind of dive into that. Tell us more.
Yeah, definitely. So, um, we're not always fighting in a relationship. We're not always arguing. So the times that we're not and we're in that state of um, that alignment, we want to be intentional with it. And when we say intimacy, people often, the first thing they think of is like physical intimacy. But actually, there's different ways to be intimate with your partner. And just being aware of the different ways, kind of very similar to the five love languages, it gives us this roadmap to how we can feel fulfilled and how our partner can feel fulfilled. So, what are these six intimacy tanks? It's emotional, physical, sexual, experiential, spiritual, and intellectual. And why is it important? It's because, as Esther Perel says, we're that never in the history of mankind have we had so much expectations from our partner. Back then it was partner's the provider, and that was that. And then, or the partner's like the father of your kids. But now it's my partner needs to be my best friend, my lover, my confidant, my husband, my so many expectations. And so sometimes it can feel very overwhelming for the other person to feel like I need to fulfill all your needs. So what we want to do is we want to see these tanks and ask ourselves, who else can fill these tanks when my partner doesn't have the capacity to fill them? So that, and that's where community comes in, and friendships and family and coworkers. And we're tribally, we are historically tribal people. We thrive in communities. We're not meant to do life alone. And now with the age of social media and globalization, some of us are away from our communities, and we have this illusion that we're connected through internet, but we're lonelier than ever. We're experiencing a loneliness epidemic. So it's a reminder, also the six intimacy tanks, to lean back into community, to lean back into these safe, supportive spaces. But if I were to break down what it is, these six, so emotional is someone you feel safe expressing your emotions with, talking, being vulnerable with. Now, think of like who can fill this tank for you. Could it be your partner? Could it be maybe your best friends? Could it be that one coworker that just understands you? Then we have intellectual. This is the person who stimulates you intellectually. You can have conversations about history, about fashion, of anything that is intellectually stimulating. The third is experiential, the people that you can experience life with. Go to the movies, check out a new restaurant, take a class together, go for a picnic. The fourth is spiritual. People that either it's spiritual activities like meditating together, going to a yoga class, could be religious, going to church, going to synagogue. It could also be talking about your values and your belief systems. Fifth is your physical, and physical is non-sexual touch. So it's people that you would hug, you would hold hands with, that you feel comfortable getting that non-sexual touch from. And lastly, it's sexual. And in monogamous relationship, your partner might only feel that. In a non-monogamous, there might be more people in that. But just really sitting down with yourself, being honest of like, who can fill which tank for me? And it also like takes the pressure off of our friendships as well. Sometimes we're like, oh, my friend needs to be everything for me. Like she'll go out with me, but she won't like she's not the person that will create space for me to express my emotions. And just being kind of aware and cognitive of, okay, what tank does she fill? And then what tanks do I fill for that person? What tanks do I fill for my partner? And that awareness takes so much pressure off of our partner. And sometimes life throws you a curveball. Let's say your partner is your go-to for emotional, but they're having a really hard time at work and their capacity is now at a 10%. Instead of you feeling unfulfilled in your emotional, you can think to yourself, maybe I'll take my needs to my sister, to my best friend. So it's like you're in a gas station and you're thinking which pump to kind of pick to fill that tank for yourself.
I love that. I love that. As you're talking, I'm kind of reflecting on my own life and I'm thinking I'm married. I've been married for a long time. And, there really are things. There's a lot of things my husband and I do meet through each other, but there's definitely some things that we don't. For example, he's not going to strap on a backpack and go backpacking for 5 days, right? I have a special group of women that I do that for. And when I get that itch, I don't go to him for that. I go to them for that, which is beautiful. It works out really well. For him, he's the musical guy, so he has friends that he wants to go to a concert with that I'm not into. And it's like, go with X, go with Y. But it does create a beautiful balance. And I love that word that you used way in the beginning, kind of intentional, because if you have an awareness of what your needs are, what their needs are, what matches, what doesn't match, right? Where are the gaps? Not what's wrong, but where are the gaps? Then you can really be intentional, like you said, this isn't available, but I have a need. Who can I go to? Where else can I get that need met? And then intentionally, right, you can kind of go out and get that need met and you're going to be happier, right? Happier, healthier, and more able to just kind of, yeah, go through the day with more kind of more grounded, more peaceful, right? Less angst. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about the six intimacy tanks? How did you come up with that? How did you develop that? How did you come up with that? I'm really curious about process. So tell me how have you kind of come up with that?
Well, I'm sure I've read it somewhere. I'm sure I got the inspiration somewhere. Can I pinpoint where it was? No, but and the reason I can't pinpoint is I read multiple books simultaneously. So
Oh,
at
I
the
get
end
it.
of the month, they've all turned into one book in my mind, and I can't pinpoint where I read
Yes.
what. But
Yes.
it's definitely I've the different definitions of intimacy, and I've kind of just played around with it and like added bits and
Yeah.
pieces, like expanded the spiritual to have like values and beliefs. And it's something that resonated with me. And when I share it with others, it resonates with them. And it just kind of, sometimes having that visual of like, I'll have people like draw these like circles and put it
Mhm.
into it. It helps them depending on what kind of a learner you are. And, there's this research this very famous Harvard research, 80-year research, that the quality of our health and our happiness is dependent on our community. So really, really just kind of leaning into it, it's time for us to lean in and to allow ourselves to receive support because for women especially, we've been trained to give. So it's like, how can we open ourselves up? How can we create bodily safety to receive as well? So when you become aware of these needs of yours, and then, okay, this person can fill that need, it also kind of pushes you open to receive that from that person. So
Mhm.
it really
Yeah.
helps in so many different areas.
Yeah. And within that giving and receiving, therefore, that's where the community and the connection is created, which is again so powerful and so needed. I'm all about community and creating community. I think it's really important. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, it just came to my mind. The inspiration came from Elizabeth Earnshaw. That's where it came from. I love her. She's on Instagram. Liz Listens.
Okay.
Love
Okay.
her energy. Love her. She has two amazing books. Um, one of them is Till Stress Do Us Part, and I Want to Make This Work. Such a great
Okay.
relationship therapist. But yeah, that's where the inspiration came from.
Okay, cool. So give me say her name again, because I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You said it was Liz.
Elizabeth Earnshaw. She's at Liz Listens.
Liz listens. Okay.
Yeah.
So there, listeners, check that out. I'll be jumping over there, checking her out. We'll give Liz a shout. She'll have lots of followers by the end of the day, I'm sure, which is awesome. So, is there anything else that you want to share? You've shared so much practical tips, strategies. Is there anything else you want to throw in there? Before I kind of ask you my sage advice question. Anything else you want to add, share, tips, strategies?
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I want to share is ruptures will happen in
Mm,
conflict. No matter how trained we are, sometimes the speed of how dysregulated the body becomes is faster than how we can take a pause or time out. And so it's okay if a rupture takes place. It's like, don't fear ruptures, just lean into repair of coming back to the conversation saying, hey, I'm sorry. Just I'm sorry. No,
mm,
I'm sorry, but I'm sorry that, I'm sorry if there's
mm,
nothing after I'm sorry. I'm sorry, full stop. I want to try this conversation again. I want to repair. That came out wrong. That wasn't my intention, but I understand the impact that it had on you. Intention's 50%, impact is the other 50%. So kind of throwing out the ego out of the door and coming in and saying, I messed up. How can I make this better? And the more there was a study that I was reading of, like, it's not actually about the rupture, but the quality of the repair that influences the quality of the relationship. So don't fear messing things up in the fight. Just lean into, how can I learn from this? How can I take accountability for the impact of my actions? And how can we move forward from it? What needs to change? And repairs are so, 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 so powerful. They can be so, so
mm,
powerful. So,
mhm.
it takes time for us to master the scale of conflict resolution. But the good news is, even if we mess up, repair's there to save the day. So,
Yeah. So two things I want to highlight there. First of all, the word skill. These are skills, right? We are not born with these
yeah.
skills. We learn them, and sometimes we don't learn them in the greatest way, like kind of growing up, but we can learn. And today, you have access to so much information. There's really no excuse, right? There's really, pick up a book, look at the podcast, whatever, right? Follow somebody on Instagram, just learn. You can build these skills. Trust me, I've had to build them, right? I've had to build them. And if I can do it, then you can do it. The other thing that I really liked was this concept of repair, right? Kind of having the rupture, being able to come full, put your ego aside and all the rest of it, come full circle. And that, I guess I want to add that isn't just for intimate relationships, that's for every relationship, right? Kids, teens, friends, families, brothers, sisters. Like if you can do that, right? Think about that in every relationship. I think that's just so important, so powerful. Yeah. 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 So, last and final question is, if you were to give listeners one piece of sage advice about living intentionally, right? What would that be?
I think the core foundation of anything in life is a regulated nervous system. So I would
Mm,
say learn how to regulate your nervous system. I actually have a free ebook on my website, 11 tools, and they're simple tools, but the beauty is in the simplicity. Just take a look, try some out, build like a big toolbox for yourself. Set yourself up for success. I mean, we shared a few today of breathing, of taking a walk, splashing water on your face, rubbing ice cubes on your neck, shaking, crying, kind of create this imaginary toolbox in your head. Put these tools in. Try and trial and error, see which resonates. Because when you get triggered throughout life, and it happens, you can get triggered throughout a regular day, someone cuts you off traffic, just kind of reach into that invisible toolbox. What can I pick right now that fits the situation that I can do right now to kind of bring myself back to a regulated state? Everything starts there. When we have a regulated state, we can be better to ourselves, to others. The way we work, our career, it significantly impacts our career. The money, there's so much research now on like finances and regulation, emotional regulation. So pretty much every area of our life is impacted by it. And the simple it's like simple but super profound. So don't dismiss it because it sounds simple. Sometimes I'm like telling people, let's do a slow deep breath together. And they're like, I have bigger problems. What are you saying? And I'm like, no, 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 trust me. Let's start there. Let's start simple. So start simple with emotional regulation.
yeah, yeah. Tanaz, I'm so glad you mentioned breath because as you're talking, I'm thinking about breath and I get that eye roll all the time. Let's just take a few breaths, take a breath, like, and you got the eye roll, and it's not going to help. But I mean, that is literally a physiological tool that you are carrying around with you all the time, 24/7. I mean, and you have direct access, right? So that for me is such a powerful tool. So yeah, so you can be super intentional about learning about your nervous system when it's dysregulated, when it's feeling pretty calm, and then choosing the tool from the toolbox that's going to help, like what I call bring it down a notch, right? Let's just bring it down a notch. And it can be simple. It's one of those things, right? Simple but not easy sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So thank you so much. You've shared so much wisdom today. I really appreciate it. If people want to reach out or learn more about you, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on every platform at Minutes on Growth. So minutes and then ON growth on Facebook, Instagram. My website is the same. My podcast is the same. So, yeah, I have a bunch of resources on the website, create content daily. Just kind of trying to, again, I'm a teacher archetype. So I'm like simplifying these concepts to raise awareness. And yeah, you can find me on there.
I love that. And I will be sure to put all those links in the show notes. And I would encourage listeners, please check out the podcast, Minutes on Growth. There's some short pieces in there. Again, it was the episode I listened to was really helpful. So check it out. She's amazing. Thank you so much, Tanaz,
Thank
for
you, Kate.
checking in and sharing so much today. I just appreciate you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate you and your time. Remember that I do love to hear from listeners, so connect with me at katechampionauthor.com. Grab your free hiking guide, share your favorite episode with a friend, and subscribe to the show. Until next time. Hey, me again. Just a reminder, this podcast should not be considered professional advice. It's also not a substitute for mental, physical, or any other healthcare related treatment. For any questions about your condition and or concerns, please contact a fully licensed healthcare professional. Thank you.